My name is David. I'm 68 years old, and for 42 of those years, I've been married to the same woman, Linda. I love her more than I can put into words. She's my rock, my partner, my best friend. And for the last 6 months, I have been driving her absolutely, completely, certifiably insane. It's not what you think. There's no other woman. There's no secret addiction. There's no late life crisis that involves a sports car and a bad toupee. The problem is much quieter, much more domestic, and in some ways, much more dangerous. The problem is that 8 months ago, I retired, and ever since then, as my dear, patient, and increasingly frustrated wife puts it, I'm underfoot all day. And the worst part? The part that keeps me up at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle rhythm of her breathing beside me. She's right. She is 100%, unequivocally, painfully right. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because I have a terrifying feeling that I'm not the only man going through this. I'm not the only one who spent 45 years building a life around a job, only to find himself completely and utterly lost when that job disappeared. I'm not the only one who, in a desperate attempt to find a new purpose, has latched onto his spouse like a life raft, only to realize he's slowly, unintentionally, pulling her under with him. This is the story of how I almost lost a 42-year marriage, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Not through betrayal, but through boredom. Not because I stopped loving my wife, but because I forgot how to live a life of my own. And if you're a man approaching retirement, or if you're married to one, I need you to listen. Because this isn't just my story. It might be yours too. For 45 years, I was an accountant, a senior partner at a mid-sized firm downtown. My life was a symphony of spreadsheets, deadlines, and fiscal quarters. It was predictable. It was structured. It was safe. I woke up at 6 a.m. every morning. I put on a suit and tie. I drank 2 cups of black coffee and ate 1 piece of whole wheat toast. I drove the same route to work, parked in the same spot, and sat at the same desk. My world was built on the solid bedrock of routine, and I was good at it. I was respected. I was, in my own quiet way, important. Linda's world was different. She's a ceramic artist. While I was crunching numbers, she was shaping clay. While I was attending board meetings, she was firing up her kiln in the studio she built in our backyard. For the last 20 years, since our son Mark went off to college, she has built her own life, her own business, right here in this house. She has clients, she has gallery showings. She has a rhythm and a flow to her days that is entirely her own. Our marriage worked, I see now, not just because we loved each other, but because we had our own separate worlds to occupy. We were 2 planets in a stable, predictable orbit. I had my office, she had her studio. And at the end of the day, we would meet in the quiet space between our worlds. And we would share the stories of our travels. I never really thought about what would happen when my world stopped spinning. Retirement was always this abstract concept, a distant finish line. It was the reward for a life of hard work. It was supposed to be the golden age, the victory lap. I imagined sleeping in, playing golf, traveling. I imagined a life of blissful, unstructured freedom. I never once considered what that freedom would actually feel like. I never considered that for a man who has lived his entire life in a cage of routine, even a gilded one, the sudden absence of bars can be terrifying. I never considered that my victory lap would feel more like walking off a cliff. The first few weeks were a novelty. I did all the things I thought retired people were supposed to do. I slept until 8 a.m., which felt scandalously late. I read the newspaper from front to back, including the classifieds. I watched daytime television, a bizarre and alien landscape of screaming talk show hosts and impossibly cheerful chefs. I tried to take up golf, but I found the slow pace and the quiet frustration of it all to be a special kind of torture. I was a man of action, of debits and credits, of problems to be solved. Hitting a small white ball across a manicured lawn felt pointless. So I turned my attention to the house, our house, or, as I was beginning to realize, Linda's house. She had her systems, her way of doing things, and in my newfound idleness, I saw only inefficiency. I saw problems to be solved. I was a man with a hammer, and everything looked like a nail. It started in the kitchen. Linda has a very specific way of organizing her spices. Alphabetical? Of course not. It was by cuisine. Italian spices here, Mexican spices there, Asian spices in this other corner. It made no logical sense to me. So one Tuesday morning, while she was in her studio, I decided to fix it. I took every single spice jar out of the cabinet and rearranged them, alphabetically, the way God and the Dewey Decimal System intended. I stood back admiring my work. The beautiful, orderly lines of allspice to turmeric. It was a masterpiece of logic and efficiency. When Linda came in for lunch, she opened the cabinet and just stood there, silent, for a full minute. I waited for the praise, the gasp of admiration, the, "Oh, David, you're a genius." It did not come. Instead, she turned to me, her face a mask of polite confusion, and said, "David, where is the cumin?" "Right where it should be," I said, beaming. "In the C section, between cinnamon and coriander." She just stared at me. "But I need it for the chili. It's always next to the chili powder." "But that's not alphabetical, dear," I explained, as if to a small child. "This is much more efficient." She closed the cabinet door, took a slow, deep breath, and said, "Thank you, David. That was thoughtful." And then she went back to the studio, and I realized she had made a sandwich for lunch instead of the chili she had planned. I had solved a problem that didn't exist, and in doing so, I had created a new one. It was my first inkling that my brand of help might not be the kind of help she needed or wanted. But I didn't learn my lesson. My idleness was a relentless engine, and it needed fuel. I moved on to the bookshelf, rearranging her novels by author instead of by color, which is how she liked them. I optimized her gardening shed, putting all the small trowels in one drawer and all the large ones in another. I even created a spreadsheet to track our household expenses, complete with pivot tables and color-coded charts, and presented it to her one evening with the flourish of a magician revealing his final trick. She looked at it, smiled that same tight, polite smile, and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to her book. I was trying to be useful. I was trying to contribute. But what I was really doing was imposing my world onto hers. I was taking the rigid, structured logic of my accounting firm and trying to apply it to the fluid, creative chaos of her life. I was trying to turn her home into my office, and it was slowly, quietly, driving a wedge between us. Linda is a patient woman, a saint, really. For the first few months, she tolerated my intrusions with a grace I did not deserve. She would gently move the spices back to their original, illogical places. She would quietly reorganize the bookshelf by the color of the rainbow. She would thank me for my spreadsheets and then never look at them again. She was trying to give me space to find my footing. She was trying to be a supportive wife. but even saints have their limits. Her studio was her sanctuary. It was the one place in the house that was unequivocally hers. It had a sign on the door, a beautiful ceramic tile she had made herself that said, "Quiet, artist at work." For 42 years, I had respected that sign. I understood that when she was in there, she was not to be disturbed. But now, that closed door felt like a barrier. It felt like a rejection. I was a man adrift, and my wife was in a lifeboat just a few feet away, and she was asking me not to climb in. So I started to find excuses to break the rule. I would knock on the door and ask if she wanted a cup of tea. 5 minutes later, I would knock again and ask if she was too warm, if she wanted me to open a window. An hour later, I would knock again with a plate of cookies I had bought at the store. I was a persistent, well-meaning pest. Each knock was a question. Are you still there? Do you still need me? Am I still important? One afternoon, she was working on a large, intricate vase, a commission for a gallery in the city. She was in the zone, her hands covered in clay, her brow furrowed in concentration. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. The door creaked open and I poked my head in. "Just wanted to see how you're doing," I said with a cheerful smile. She didn't look up. Her hands kept moving, shaping the clay on the wheel. "I'm working, David." "I can see that," I said, stepping inside. "It's looking great. Is that for the Henderson Gallery?" "David, please," she said, her voice tight. "I need to focus." I know, I said, walking closer. "I just had an idea, for your business. I was thinking we could create a projection of your quarterly earnings, factor in the cost of materials and overhead, and really streamline your..." That's when she stopped. The wheel slowed to a halt. Her hands, caked in wet clay, dropped to her sides. She looked up at me, and for the first time the polite mask was gone. In its place was a flash of pure, undiluted frustration. It was like a lightning strike in a clear blue sky. It was terrifying. "David," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Get out." I was so stunned I couldn't move. "I was just trying to help." "I don't need you to help," she said, her voice rising. "I don't need you to optimize my spice rack. I don't need you to color code my spreadsheets. And I certainly don't need you to project my quarterly earnings. I need you to let me work. I need you to give me 5 minutes of peace. I need you to find something to do with your life that doesn't involve meddling in mine." And then came the words that would echo in my head for months. The words that gave a name to the formless anxiety that had been haunting our home. "I love you, David," she said, her voice softening slightly, but her eyes still holding that fire. "But you are underfoot all day. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can't work. I feel like I'm being followed constantly. I feel like my own home is no longer my own. You need to find your own space because you are taking up all of mine." She turned back to her wheel, and the message was clear. The conversation was over. I backed out of the studio, closing the door behind me, and the click of the latch felt like a gunshot. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Underfoot. That's what I was. A nuisance. A piece of furniture that was always in the way. A stray dog that kept getting under its owner's feet. It was a brutal, devastating, and perfectly accurate description. And in that moment, I realized that my retirement wasn't a victory lap. It was a disease, and it was slowly killing my marriage. That confrontation should have been a wake-up call. It should have been the moment I realized I needed to change. But I was a man who had spent his entire life avoiding emotional complexity. I was an accountant. I dealt in numbers, in facts, in black and white. The gray areas of life, the messy, unpredictable world of human feelings. It was a foreign country to me, and I was lost without a map. So I did what I always did when faced with a problem I didn't understand. I tried to solve it with logic. The problem, as I saw it, was that I was too present, too visible, too audible. The solution, therefore, was to become the opposite, to become a ghost in my own home. I made a conscious decision to give Linda her space. I would be quiet. I would be invisible. I would be not underfoot. It was a disaster. My new strategy was one of silent, hovering presence. I would sit in the living room, which shares a wall with her studio, and pretend to read a book. But I wasn't reading. I was listening. I was listening for the whir of her potter's wheel, for the sound of her moving around, for any sign that she might need me. I would make myself a sandwich for lunch, and then just happen to make an extra one for her, leaving it on a plate outside her studio door with a little note that said, "Just in case you're hungry." I was trying to be thoughtful, but what I was really being was creepy. I was a well-meaning stalker. One afternoon, she was on the phone with the owner of a gallery in New York. It was a big deal, a potential solo show. I could hear her voice through the wall, and it sounded excited, animated. I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to share in her success. So, I tiptoed to the studio door and pressed my ear against it, trying to catch snippets of the conversation. I heard her say something about shipping costs, and my accountant brain immediately kicked into high gear. I knew about shipping. I had clients who shipped things all the time. I could help. I waited until I heard her hang up the phone. I counted to 60, to make it seem like I wasn't just waiting outside her door. Then I knocked gently. "Linda?" I called out. "Can I come in for a second?" She opened the door, a wide, happy smile on her face. "David, you won't believe it. That was Margaret from the Soho Gallery. She wants to give me a solo show this fall." "That's fantastic, dear," I said, my own excitement genuine. "I overheard you talking about shipping. I have some ideas on how to minimize those costs. We could look into freight consolidation, or maybe even..." Her smile faltered. It didn't disappear entirely, but it dimmed, like a light bulb losing power. "David," she said, her voice patient but strained. "How did you know I was talking about shipping?" The question hung in the air between us. I couldn't very well tell her I had been eavesdropping like a spy in a bad movie. "Oh, you know," I said, trying to sound casual. "The walls are thin. I just happened to overhear." She looked at me, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. She knew that I had been out there, hovering, listening, waiting for my chance to be useful. She knew that my silence was just a different kind of noise. She knew that my invisibility was just a different kind of presence. "I appreciate the thought, David," she said, her voice flat. "But I have it handled. My gallery representative is taking care of the logistics." She stepped back and closed the door, and once again the click of the latch felt like a judgment. I had tried to give her space, but I had only managed to suffocate her more quietly. I was a ghost, but my haunting was just as disruptive as my physical presence had been. My final, and perhaps most pathetic attempt at a solution was to try and anticipate her needs. If I couldn't be a part of her world, I could at least be the perfect stage manager for it. I started getting up even earlier, at 5 a.m., to make her coffee just the way she liked it. I would go out and buy her favorite flowers and place them on her work table before she woke up. I would clean her tools for her, meticulously, arranging them in a neat, orderly row, a silent testament to my devotion and my idleness. One evening, she came into the kitchen after a long day in the studio, looking tired but happy. "I had such a productive day," she said, stretching her arms over her head. "I finished the last of the pieces for the Henderson Commission." "That's wonderful, dear," I said. "I cleaned all your tools for you." She looked at me, and her face fell. "Oh, David," she said, her voice filled with a weariness that went bone deep. "You didn't." "I did," I said proudly. "They were a mess, covered in clay. Now they're spotless." She walked over to the sink where I had left the tools drying in a neat row. She picked up a small wooden rib, a tool she had used for 20 years, its surface worn smooth by her hands. "David," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I don't like my tools to be clean. I like them to have a little bit of clay on them. It helps me get a better grip. And I have a system for how I leave them. I leave them in the order I'm going to need them the next day. You've ruined my whole setup for tomorrow." I stood there, speechless. I had spent an hour trying to do something nice for her, something helpful, and I had only made her life more difficult. I had once again solved a problem that didn't exist. I had once again been underfoot, even in my attempts not to be. That night we went to bed in silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that felt more like a wall than a space. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like a complete and utter failure. I had failed at retirement. I had failed at being a husband. I had failed at the simple act of existing in a house with the woman I loved, without driving her crazy. I was 68 years old, and I had no idea who I was or what I was supposed to do. And I was terrified that I was about to lose the only thing that still mattered. The breaking point came a few weeks later, in the form of our son, Mark. He's a good boy, a lawyer, married, with a daughter of his own. He came over for dinner one Sunday, and the tension in our house was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Linda and I were being painfully polite to each other. "Could you pass the salt, dear?" "Of course, my love." It was a performance, and we were both terrible actors. Mark watched us all through dinner, his brow furrowed with concern. After we had finished, Linda excused herself to go to her studio, a clear sign that she needed to escape. Mark helped me clear the dishes, and then he turned to me, his expression serious. "Dad," he said, his voice gentle, "what's going on with you and Mom?" I tried to brush it off. "Nothing, son. We're fine. Just a little tired." He wasn't buying it. "No, you're not," he said. "I've never seen Mom so on edge. And you're like a shadow. You're just hovering. What's going on?" And so I told him. I told him everything, about the spice rack and the studio and the cleaning of the tools. I told him about the underfoot comment. I told him about my pathetic attempts to be invisible, to be helpful, to be anything other than a nuisance. I laid it all out, my failures, my anxieties, my complete and utter cluelessness. And when I was done, I looked at my son, expecting pity, or maybe even a little bit of scorn. But what I saw in his eyes was a deep, profound sadness. "Oh, Dad," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" I asked, my voice defensive. "Mom doesn't need you to be her assistant," he said. "She doesn't need you to be her business manager. She doesn't need you to be her housekeeper. She's been doing all of that herself for 20 years. She's got it covered. What she needs is a partner. What she needs is her husband. And right now, you're not being her husband. You're being her intern. Her unpaid, unqualified, and deeply annoying intern." The word stung. Intern. It was even worse than underfoot. It was a demotion, a complete stripping of my status, not just as a CEO of my own life, but as an equal partner in my own marriage. "You need to get a life, Dad," he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "You need to find something to do with your time that has nothing to do with Mom. You need to find your own purpose, your own friends, your own hobbies. You need to build your own world again. Because right now, you're trying to live in hers, and you're suffocating her. And if you don't stop, you're going to lose her." He let the words hang in the air. He was right. I knew he was right. But hearing it from my own son, seeing the truth of it reflected in his eyes, it was like a physical blow. I had spent my whole life being the one with the answers, the one who was in control. And now my own son was telling me that I was a clueless, suffocating intern, and that I was on the verge of destroying the most important thing in my life. That night, after Mark had gone home, Linda came to me. She sat next to me on the couch, but she didn't touch me. She just sat there, a few inches of space between us that felt like a canyon. "David," she said, her voice soft but firm, I think it would be a good idea if you went to stay with your sister for a little while. Just for a week. To give us both some space. To give us both a chance to breathe." Her sister lived 3 hours away. A week. She was asking me to leave my own home for a week. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. A gentle, loving, and absolutely terrifying ultimatum. This was it. This was the moment that my son had warned me about. This was the moment I had been dreading. I was being evicted. Not from our house, not yet, but from our life together. And as I looked into her tired, sad eyes, I knew that if I didn't do something, that 1 week eviction could very easily become permanent. I packed a bag. I didn't say much. There was nothing to say. I just packed a bag, got in my car, and drove. The 3-hour drive to my sister's house was the longest drive of my life. With every mile that passed, I felt like I was getting further and further away from the life I had known. I was a man in exile, and I had no one to blame but myself. My sister, God bless her, didn't ask too many questions. She just gave me a hug, showed me to the guest room, and left me alone. And for the first time in 8 months, I was truly, completely alone. There was no one to hover over, no one to try and help, no one to be underfoot with. There was just me and the 4 walls of a guest room, and the deafening silence of my own failure. And in that silence, I finally started to think. Really think. I thought about my 45 years at the firm. I thought about the structure, the routine, the sense of purpose it had given me. I had built my entire identity around that job. I was David, the accountant. It was who I was. And when that was gone, I had nothing left. I was a building without a foundation, and I was crumbling. I realized that I had been trying to make Linda my new job, I had been trying to apply the same principles of management and efficiency to my marriage that I had applied to my career. I had been trying to find my purpose in her life, instead of building one of my own. I had become a parasite, feeding off her energy, her creativity, her purpose, because I had none of my own. And it was killing her. It was killing us. I spent that week walking. I would walk for hours through the quiet suburban streets of my sister's neighborhood. And with every step, I felt a little bit of the fog begin to clear. I realized that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't go back to being the hovering intern, the silent ghost, the well-meaning pest. I had to go back as a different man. I had to go back as a whole person. A person with his own life, his own interests, his own purpose. A person who could be a partner to Linda, not a project. A person who could bring something to the relationship, not just take from it. I made a plan, a real plan, not a spreadsheet, not a list of optimizations, but a plan for a new life, a life that was mine. I called the local community college and signed up for a woodworking class. I had always liked the idea of working with my hands, of creating something tangible. I found a local hiking group for men my age, a group that met 3 times a week to explore the nearby trails. I even called the public library and volunteered to help them organize their archives. It was accounting of a sort, but it was for a cause I believed in. It was a way to use my skills without trying to impose them on my wife. When I drove home at the end of that week, I was a different man. I was still scared. I was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I had a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, a sense of hope. I walked into the house, and Linda was there, waiting for me. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face, and I just said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You were right. I was underfoot. I was lost, and I was suffocating you. But I have a plan. I have my own plan, and it has nothing to do with you." And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. A real smile. A smile that reached her eyes. And she said, "Welcome home, David. I've missed you." That was 6 months ago. And I can tell you that it hasn't been a straight line. There are still days when I feel the old pull, the old urge to meddle, to hover, to be useful. But now, I have other places to put that energy. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to my woodworking class. I'm terrible at it, but I love it. I've made a wobbly bookshelf, a crooked picture frame, and a very, very ugly birdhouse. But they are mine. I made them, and that feels good. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I go hiking with my group. We call ourselves the Over the Hill Gang. We're a bunch of old guys, huffing and puffing our way up mountains, complaining about our knees and our grandkids. But we're out there. We're moving. We're talking. We're living. And I've made more real friends in the last 6 months than I did in the last 20 years at my firm. And on Saturdays, I volunteer at the library. I sit in a quiet, dusty room, surrounded by old books and historical documents, and I help them make sense of the past. It's quiet work. It's solitary work. But it's meaningful work. And it's my work. And Linda? She has her space back. She has her studio back. She has her life back. And because of that, I have her back. We have dinner together every night, and now we both have stories to tell. I tell her about the dovetail joint I'm trying to master, or the funny thing one of the guys in my hiking group said. She tells me about the new glaze she's experimenting with, or the difficult client she's dealing with. We are 2 planets in orbit again, but this time our orbits are richer, fuller, more interesting. And the space between us is no longer a canyon of silence. It's a space of connection, of respect, of love. So here is my final message to you. Your spouse is not your retirement plan. Your marriage is not your new career. Your partner's life is not a void for you to fill with your own idleness. The greatest gift you can give to someone you love is a life of your own. A life that is rich and full and interesting. A life that gives you purpose and passion and a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Because when you have that, you are no longer underfoot. You are a partner. You are an equal. You are a whole person. And that is the only kind of person who can truly be a part of a whole and healthy marriage. Don't wait until you get evicted from your own life. Start building your new one today. Because the space you give your partner is the oxygen that will keep your love alive.